Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I thought I'd just let it, let this fizz ring linger on for a little while before I start speaking. Well, my name is Kunal, and I'll be your educator. Let me start by talking a little bit about myself before we proceed. And I'm sure from the first slide you would have guessed the topic would be champagne. Um, as I said, my name is Kunal. I am a certified educator from Wine and Spirit Educational Trust, UK. I am also a certified Sherry educator from the regulatory Sherry Council in Jerez de la Frontera in Spain. I've had about 15 years of experience working in restaurants and hotels. I've been a sommelier. Um, I run, I have run teams both in food and beverage and on front of the house sides as well. I've been in education academia for about 7, 8 years, teaching about food and beverages. And I'll be your teacher today. So, as I said, so this is a series of very basic introductory series of wine regions of France, and I thought what would be better than to start with champagne of all the drinks, of all the celebrations. That's why we started off with the fizz, just to mark the opening of this series. So let's proceed. Okay, so our journey into Champagne is obviously going to start from talking a little bit about the wine regions of France. So as you can see, we've got a map of France here, which is very self-explanatory map, if you may. You can have a look, as to where these prestigious regions of France are. I'm just gonna try something, maybe my marker or my pen. Let me just go and highlight, or maybe so. Oh, here you go. Right. So when we talk about Champagne, Champagne is the northernmost region in France, wine producing northernmost region in France, and that's in orange, which is right here. There you go. Well, not a bad job. That's your champagne. We're just gonna rub that, just make it a little cleaner. Yeah. So that's your Champagne region. You can see that this is the most northern region in France, and then you've got Chablis starting from here, and then Burgundy, and then Beaujolais, and then down south Rhone. This is Loire, and then Bordeaux, of course, here. And the other regions. So we won't go in that Alsace over here, but we're gonna park right here in Champagne. Being the northernmost region, you can imagine how the weather would be. We'll talk a little bit more about weather in a while, but for now, I just wanted to show you where exactly we are, just to give you an idea of where the region is and how that would affect the kind of grapes that are grown over here. So moving on. Okay, so moving forward, before we start with champagne, let's talk a little bit about the French wine laws that would help us move ahead in the right direction. So the lowest tier of this pyramid would be wine, just basic wine, or divin as it's called in French. The only regulation on this group is that all the grapes should come from France itself. Very basic, regulations, nothing too complicated. The wines also are straight, friendly drinking, fruit forward, um, a very basic kind of wine. The second, which is on top of that, would be the PGI wines. which is also called the IGP or vin de pays, Indication Géographique Protégée, as it's called in the French. These are slightly higher regulations, but not as much as the next level that we're going to talk about. Obviously, a little more than the previous one, which is Diwan. Limited restriction, at least 85% of the grapes should come from within the boundaries of delimited vin de pays region. So if you have a vin de pays region which is marked in as far as territory is concerned, 85% of those grapes have to come from the boundary of this particular region. 15% of the grapes can be outside of this region. So that is one regulation. As far as IGP wines are concerned, there are about currently 75 designated regions in France. The topmost would be the PDO law, which in which, especially in France, you can also call them. In France, they say AOC, which is Appellation d'origine contrôlée. Strict laws, everything is regulated, as far as the yields are concerned, the winemaking techniques are concerned, the wine grain techniques are concerned, how the wines are planted, extremely strict regulations. And these are this is the tier, this is the top of the pyramid, crème de la crème, as you say, the ones that you talk about, the great wines of France. Currently there are about 300 AOCs in France, which are on top of this pyramid, and these contribute to the maximum revenue of the French wine industry, because these are the most expensive ones. So that is a little bit about the laws of France. Let's move to the real thing, that is a champagne. Hold on to it. Okay, let's define what champagne is. So champagne is defined as a sparkling wine made in the delimited region of Champagne in France by the method Champenois. Now, everybody knows that champagne is a sparkling wine. All champagnes are sparkling wines, but not all sparkling wines are champagne. So that's something that you can, use as a thumb rule or whatever you want to call it. Champagnes are always made in the Champagne region of France, and we'll talk about this a little later. You cannot have a condition where you make a champagne in the US or any other part of the world. Champagne can only be made in Champagne region of France, and it can only be made by method Champenois, which is an extremely labor-intensive method, and we're going to talk about what that method is. So, just basic definition: champagne is a sparkling wine made in Champagne region of France by method Champenois, or traditional method. It's also called traditional method. Method Champenois is more accepted, widely accepted rather. So moving forward, okay, origin of champagne. So most people are unaware of the fact that the origin of champagne is more accidental than deliberate. It was a fact that when the fermentation, when the wines were being made and the fermentation started, uh, it used to coincide with the fact that the winter came quite early in this cold region. So around November and December, the temperature used to dip and the fermentation used to stop. So this wine, which had undergone incomplete fermentation, was bottled, and it was during the spring months when the temperature used to rise again, the fermentation used to restart. As the fermentation used to restart, one of the byproducts of fermentation is carbon dioxide, which used to get trapped in the bottle as the fermentation began again. And it was this carbon dioxide which was initially seen as bubbles in the wine, and that is where the bubbles and the sparkles came along. So it was more deliberate than more accidental than deliberate. I'm sorry. And earlier it was because this region is quite close to Paris, and there was a lot of demand for still wines in this region. So a lot of Chardonnay, a lot of Pinot Noir. This region traditionally was known more for still wines than for sparkling wines. So it was this still wine that ultimately was undergoing that incomplete fermentation and then resuming that incomplete fermentation in spring again, which led to that bubble in the wine. And then later on, it was like Dom Perignon and others who, perfected this process and made um, what we now know as champagne. So, champagne is quite accidental. It is a byproduct of still wines and incomplete fermentation. It's a very interesting topic if you actually want to read about it. But that's how champagne came along. It was never something that was intended to be. It was rather accidental. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the facts of champagne, and maybe some of this you already know, maybe some of it would be new to you. Champagne can only be produced in the region of Champagne in France. That's the you know that's really really basic about Champagne, and that is something which they were very strong about. Um, of course, now it's even tougher and stricter. The rules are extremely strict. You can't even name a food product as you can't even have a label of a food product named champagne, because champagne is a protected name. It can only be used as far as making sparkling wines are concerned in Champagne. You can't have a case where champagne, where a sparkling wine is being made and it is being named champagne. It's not possible. It's a protected name. There were times some years ago when something called Californian champagne what was stocked and produced. It has since stopped as the support for fraternity. A lot of Californian winemakers have stopped doing it, and it's no more being produced. So what you will have is Californian sparkling wine, not Californian champagne. So champagne would only come from Champagne. That's something uh, which is the first point that you should remember about this magnificent beverage. Champagne is the most labor-intensive wine to produce. Absolutely correct. It undergoes two fermentations, and we'll talk about that two fermentations again. So first fermentation happens in either a barrel or a tank, depending where you are, which producer you are, and second happens in the bottle. So obviously, the wine has to undergo two fermentations. Obviously that's a lot of time consuming, labor intensive. Um, Time, labor, money, everything involved in champagne is just to a different level altogether, and that is why you would see champagnes fetch top prices. Yeah, it's not an easy beverage to produce. It takes a lot of effort, and we'll talk in the next few slides as to what those steps are. Champagne is the most northerly wine region of France. As a matter of fact, I think, if I'm not wrong, it is the most northerly region in the world. Major wine producing nation, major wine producing region in the world. Of course, the wines being produced in the UK now, but Champagne is quite cool, very cold. And that's why you would have a case where a lot of grapes do not reach that level of sugar and ripeness, thus keeping a lot of acidity in the grapes, which is extremely important when you're making sparkling wines. So that's one more thing that we need to remember. Sparkling wines are generally, it's good for sparkling wines to have that acidity. Principal towns of Reims and Epernay. Reims is about, I think about 100 kilometers from Paris. It's not too far away, maybe less than that. So very close to Paris, and that's one of the more another reasons of the success of Champagne, because proximity to Paris has given it so many opportunities to send their wines to different regions, to the UK and other places. So that's one more reason why the proximity of this region to Paris is so important. 49 million bubbles in a standard bottle. Remember, guys, one more thing: more the bubbles in a bottle of sparkling wine, the better it's going to be. That means the smaller those bubbles are going to be. If there are 49 million bubbles in a standard bottle, you're looking at those bubbles at being very, very small. The smaller the bubbles are in a sparkling wine, the better the quality of that sparkling wine would be, because those bubbles wouldn't escape in the air as quickly as bigger ones would. So the smaller the bubbles, the better the quality of wine. Pressure of 6 atmospheres. So pressure of 6 atmospheres is almost twice of what's in your car tire. Your car tire has a pressure of about 2.5 to 3 atmospheres. A bottle of champagne has 6. Not all sparkling wines have the same. Champagne is probably the highest one. You know, there are other sparkling wines which have 2 or 3 or maybe 4. But champagne, 6 atmospheres, that's quite a bit. There's a lot of pressure in the bottle. So you can imagine, the more the pressure, the more the carbon dioxide, obviously more the bubbles. And that's why champagne is the beverage of choice for celebrations. Okay, so the next, I've just got a map of Champagne. We've already seen where Champagne stands, the map, the region stands as far as France is concerned. But I've just got map which will give you a clear indication of the sub-regions of Champagne. We won't go too much in detail because this is an introductory, course. I would be doing an advanced version of this as well, which would be ideal for the advanced students, maybe the ones who are going in for WSET level 3. But for now, we'll just restrict ourselves to this. So Vallée de Marne is one of the regions: Côte de Sézanne, Côte de Blanc, Montagne de Reims, and Côte de Bar. So Côte de Bar, as you can see, I'll just sort of get my fancy pen. There you go. That's Côte de Bar, which is slightly away from the main region of Champagne, which is this. This is the city of Reims, and Paris is somewhere here. Somewhere here, I'm not sure. Sort of quite close, you can see. And all these regions they've got their own distinctive personalities. They've got their different distinctive soils, terroirs. There are certain grapes that do well in a certain region, there's certain grapes that do well in the other. And yeah, so that's gives you a clear idea as to, and that's Epernay as well, gives you a clear idea as to these small sub-regions that crisscross the region of Champagne, how these wines would differ if they are being produced in either Côte de Bar or Côte de Blanc. So they'll be different, they'll have different characteristics coming from different regions. We will not dwell into it too much. Let me get my fancy razor here and get it off. There you go. Oh, lovely. Okay. Okay, let's move on to the grapes. What goes in a glass of champagne? Technically, you would be told that there are 3 major grapes which are used in making champagne, and you'll be correct. Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, but there are 7 fermented grapes which can go in a glass of champagne, which can be used to produce champagne. But these 3 on your slide here are the most important ones, and majority of the champagnes are made by these three grapes. Chardonnay, which adds freshness and elegance to champagne. Pinot Noir, which adds body and complexity to the champagne. And then Pinot Meunier, which adds fruitiness and floral aromas to the champagne. So all of these three grapes have different characteristics and give different kind of characteristics to the champagne, to the final product. Now you can have champagne which can just be made from Chardonnay, or just be made from Pinot Noir, or be made from Pinot Meunier. It doesn't matter if it's a black grape or a white one. We'll still be discarding the skins, which has all the color and which can seep into the wine. We'll just be keeping the juice for making the champagne. So you can have a case where the wine is made from 100% Chardonnay, or 100% Pinot Noir, or 100% Meunier. And there's a name associated for those kind of champagnes, which we will talk about later. But for now, these are the three major grapes that go into making champagne. Bulk of champagnes are made from these three grapes. There are another four grapes that are used in making champagne, and those are Arbonne, Petit Mislier, Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Gris. So these are the four minor grapes that are used in making champagne. It would be interesting to know that most of the producers in champagne generally do not use these grapes, but there are a few producers that either use all 7 grapes or use a few among these minor grapes. And even if they use it, it's only a small percentage, maybe 2 or 3%, or maybe 5 maximum, the blend that is being used of these minor grapes. Generally, they're either kept out or used in a very, very minor way in champagnes. So, how's champagne made? As we discussed, champagne undergoes 2 fermentations. One is obviously the primary fermentation, and the other one is called the secondary fermentation. You pick up your grapes. Now I'm gonna use my fancy pen again. There you go, that's your grapes. You use your grapes, you destem your grapes, you undergo the fermentation where sugar is eaten up by the yeast, CO2 is produced, energy is produced, which is in the form of heat, and this is what we need, ethanol. Ethanol is produced, that is alcohol, and you get a wine. Now this wine, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a still wine. A still wine. We are going to make this wine undergo a secondary fermentation wherein the bubbles would be produced, but that we'll talk about later. So our first aim is to collect the grapes, destem the grapes, get the grapes to undergo fermentation, which is sugar plus yeast is equal to ethanol, and then making a still wine from it. And this is going to be a white wine wherein we do not need the skins. So the skins would be taken off. Okay. So post our first fermentation or primary fermentation, the bottles are sealed. Before sealing the bottles, there's something called lekha de tirage that is put in the bottles, which is a combination of unfermented grape juice and some yeast. And then these bottles are taken to underground cellars, and then they're kept there. So what happens, since now this bottle has some unfermented grape juice and yeast, you will have a scenario wherein the secondary fermentation starts again, wherein you will have a slight increase in alcohol content, maybe 0.5% or maybe 1%. But more importantly, you will have a case wherein you will have the production of CO2, the bubbles that we want. Um, and as this bubbles, as the fermentation gets produced, more of this CO2 is produced, and more of the bubbles get produced inside the bottle. These bubbles incorporate in the wine, get dissolved in the wine, and stay like this for about 15 months. That's the minimum aging for champagne, 15 months. And out of those 15 months, 12 months would be on something called lees, Lees, lees. So lees is basically, remember that yeast that we had put in liquor de tirage, which broke down the sugar and got us a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of CO2. That yeast obviously now is dead. So where is that yeast going to go? That yeast would stay in the bottle, but sort of settles down in the bottle. Um, and this lees is what gives the characteristic flavor to the champagne, that biscuity, brioche, toasty flavor profile that champagne is most famous for. The minimum spending time is 15 months, as I said, and 12 months would be on lees, but generally most producers extend that to maybe even sometimes double or thrice the minimum requirements. Once they've achieved that in the underground cellars, there's something called riddling that that the bottles need to undergo, because now, since you've got that yeast in the bottle, the yeast has imparted the flavor. We do not need the yeast anymore, but we still need to get rid of the yeast. So riddling is something, if you see this gentleman right here, there you go, my pen again. This gentleman right here uh, is moving the bottles, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few slides. So this is a way where they move the bottles from an angle of where the bottles are horizontal, and then to 15 degrees, and then to 30 degrees, and then to 60 degrees, and then you have a case where these bottles are upside down with the neck vertical towards the floor. So slowly and steadily this yeast assembles to the neck, and then there's a process which is called disgorgement, wherein this neck is immersed into chilled substance, wherein this neck gets frozen. So does the yeast inside this neck, and then with a pressure, when you open this, the pressure inside the bottle is so much that it just pushes out that frozen yeast, or lees you would say, and that process is called disgorgement. Now this frozen yeast is like a capsule of white substance, which we need to get rid of, because otherwise it will it will sort of it won't damage the wine, but there'll be bits and pieces in your champagne, and you wouldn't really like that when you paid so much for a bottle of champagne. So that's the process of disgorgement. After disgorgement, dosage, which is called liquor d'expédition, wherein they, whatever little champagne that they've lost in the disgorgement process to get rid of champagne, to get rid of the yeast, they refill it, and that refilling is called dosage. Then they bottle it, and off it goes. So that's a process of champagne, right from the primary fermentation to liquor de tirage. Secondary fermentation, CO2 is produced, yeast dies off, the bottle stays in contact with the lees for 12 months on lees and 15 months total. Riddling, then disgorgement, where the yeast gets removed, dosage, and off it goes. Okay, so I sort of compiled these pics because I always like to talk about, I don't generally like to take pics of Google. More importantly, I think it's better if I share my experiences of this, of whatever product that I'm talking about. So these are the pics that were taken by me, and this is the underground cellars of Champagne. This is in Mums in Reims. So you can see these. So most of Champagne is full of these caves or caves, as they say in French. These are Champagne. These tunneled under the city of Reims. These tunnels wherein these were actually dug earlier in Roman times, when Romans found out that there's a lot of chalk under the soil of Champagne, and that's the soil that we still have in Champagne, really. So they dug out all these mining used to happen, and a lot of these caves you'll see are quite very very old. This is yours truly here. That's me. Oh, and over here you've got a case of bottles which are sitting and being riddled. So the lees is being pushed towards the the neck of the bottle, and slowly and steadily these are on an angle right now, but these would be vertical upside down very soon, to make sure all that lees comes to the neck of the bottle, and then disgorgement can happen. So that's a little bit of real time pics for you. Okay, another same concept of riddling. I mean, you can see this wonderful lady here holding the bottle of champagne. You can see it starts off about 15 degrees here. And that's about 15 degrees. Then it's moved after a while to 30, and then after a while to 45, and then after a while to 60, and then it's vertical, upside down. So all this lees that we want is in the neck, and you can see I've got this pic, and if you see, you can see a whitish substance here. That is what lees is, and it's sort of starting to accumulate in the neck. And when you open this with the force, when you freeze this neck of this bottle, the yeast freezes as well, and as soon as you open this cap, the yeast is pushed out with the pressure of the bottle. So that's what disgorgement is. So just thought would share this with you because it's quite important in the champagne making process. And you can imagine, these are the kind of things that takes up a lot of time and take up a lot of effort, labor intensive, and that's why champagne is expensive. It's not easy to make champagne. Okay, last but not the least, we'll talk about a little bit about certain terminologies associated with champagne. First of all, most of the champagnes that you will find would be non-vintage champagnes, which means that the grapes that go into making a bottle of champagne would come from multiple vintages, not from one particular year. Every champagne house has their blend, and they sort of use different QAs from different years to blend and make their house blend or house brand, as they say. So you can say that most champagnes are non-vintage or maybe multi-vintage, you can say, if that's a term. The second term would be blanc de blanc. Blanc, obviously, in French means white. So we're saying white of white, which means the champagne is made only from white grapes, 100% white grapes. And in majority of the cases, you would see that would be Chardonnay. Blanc de noir. Blanc de noir means, noir in French means black. So that would be white of black, which means a champagne made from black grapes only. That would be either Pinot Noir or Meunier. So that's Blanc de Noir. And then last but not the least is the vintage champagne. Minted champagne is made from grapes of single vintage, one particular year, and obviously that really depends on what kind of vintage it has been. It depends, year to year. If it's been a good year, then obviously you will have um, a vintage champagne. Depends on the champagne house as well. But obviously these are more. They've got more depth of flavor. They are more age worthy. They can age for a longer time. Obviously a lot more effort, and the minimum aging is 36 months. So that's also something that we need to keep in mind. And of course, the prices are pretty high for the vintage champagnes. So you're looking at the best of champagnes on this particular level. Right, so that's pretty much it from me today. So this was the introductory champagne um, experience, you can say. I would be sharing uh, more French regions on this Journey to France series that I've been working on. So my next one would be the Rhone Valley, and subsequently maybe Chablis after that. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you liked it. Have any questions? Do let me know. Cheerio. Bye bye.